Yes. So I'm Andrew Cushing, the chair of the library trustees. Right now, Karen Johnson is the treasurer. She's the one who will be coming. Jeff Nunes is the secretary. He couldn't make it this afternoon. So we've been, as probably all of you guys know, have been working on this project for years now. And we're thankful that you could make it today and kind of share your findings. And as we move ahead, do you want to do, Elena, do some of the friends want to introduce themselves?
I mean, hi guys, you know me. I don't think I need to introduction.
Okay.
I think it's more important.
All right, then we'll go for the,
yeah.
the professionals in the room. Mike, you want to start?
Mike Duffy, I'm with Horizons Engineering, and I was introduced maybe a couple years ago now, maybe just before COVID, and then I never really got started on it much, and I think a bunch of things stalled maybe a little bit too, but I'm back in the saddle, and Horizons pro bono is going to help out with whatever we can do here, whether it's a septic design or getting a well permitted or site plan, you know, anything the civil engineer would be able to do.
Great. Paige?
My name is Paige Parrish. I'm a relatively new resident to Grafton, but I work in the interior architecture field, so I've preliminarily helped put together a space plan. So I used my 3D drafting skills to kind of help give the visuals for what we've got so far.
Great. And Paul?
I'm Paul Levier. I live here in Grafton. I work for a company called Resilient Buildings Group. We do energy efficiency for buildings, but I'm here as a volunteer in this capacity today.
It's also, I guess, worth pointing out that we have several members of our strategic planning committee, which wrapped up last year, or even the fall of 21. So that's Cindy, Gary, Susan's over here. Okay, great. And Elena and the trustees themselves. How do I do this?
Well, dude, I would probably, you might just want to go ahead. I mean, how long do you want to hold it up?
You can't make any decisions.
Yes. Okay. Does it make sense to start with the site plan? Mike, do you feel like that's?
I can, and I honestly, I haven't gotten too much done on it other than I took it, there was a survey plan that was prepared a while ago as well for you guys by Chris Rollins, or who did that? Chris Rollins?
Chris Rollins, yep.
And so that was good to identify.
Andrew, do you mind if I come up and look at it? Because I've been working with Mike for the last
figure out how to
working together.
Site boundaries. Was I here 2 weeks ago, was it?
Yeah.
So 2 weeks ago, I hadn't looked at the survey plan much, but I kind of had some suspicion about the right-of-way widths that were shown and stuff, but the surveyors, I don't think it impacts what we would do in the 2 weeks since then. And so I would say we'll go with what the survey showed, and that had topographic information on it. It had the boundaries. It had road right-of-ways shown. I was able to get a site plan of the town hall and the fire station over there, and their leach field and well. So I've added
Town
that.
offices, he means.
I've added that onto the plan, even though it's off property, so it doesn't matter too much. One thing that I do believe you're going to be able to do is install the well towards the town offices, which is good. That's the uphill end of things. It's always nice to have a gravity flow into your leach field, so you know the way the site slopes downwards away from the town office. So that's good. Typically you need a 75-foot right-of-way or well protective radius. And we can get that either on the property or by going onto the road right away. So the property is owned by the town of Grafton. Their well actually expands out into the paved areas as well and out into the right of way. So I believe that we would be able to get that permitted. There's a gentleman that I'll send the plan into that will look at it for DES and say, yeah, that's adequate for what we have, what you have going there. We can put the well, or we can put the building within the right-of-way, the well protective radius, excuse me. We can put an access drive through there. We can't put any leach field related components in there.
There she is.
Sorry I'm late, car trouble. The key wouldn't go in the ignition.
So essentially at this point, I'll collect some more information today and maybe get some feedback from you folks on what your thoughts are. There was a concept plan done by someone, I don't know who did this, but they looked like they had some landscape architect skills. The way they, you know, when you look at this is kind of how a landscape architect would draw up something like that. I believe that this was to move this building down there at that time though. So, you know, we're going to be different, a little different than this. But essentially, when we'll draw up a plan that looks very similar to this, it'll show where the roads go, it'll show where the leach field goes, where the well's going, any of the site activity. A well is a relatively expensive item to put a new well in. You want to?
No, I was telling him, don't steal my chance, Darryl.
And so, whether or not the town would allow interconnection, you know, the use of that the well that's in already over there, that would be something worth pursuing. But I think that if that didn't work out, you have room on your site to put a new well. So that's good. A new well and the leach field will fit also on the site. So that's the good news, and you have quite a bit of room to work with. There's a pole out, excuse me, a pole out there right now about halfway down the property on Library Road that you'll probably utilize for the electric service to come in. There's a meter there right now, but I'd recommend you probably go with an underground electric service over the building. And you know, you might kind of site the driveway. You know, my perspective, it's always nice to be able to get all the way around a building with an access. So you may come in, the building may be centered kind of on that pole a little bit, and you could come in and have a, you know, actually be able to drive around the building. You could potentially have entrances. I see from the concept plan there's 2 entrances to the building and exits, which is always good. It's good to have 2 egresses into the building. So you know, what I would do is make sure that I show good access, sidewalk or parking, whatever it may be. And then in the main entrance there, the same thing, that there'd be some handicap parking in front, and you know how that exactly would look. The access around it wouldn't have to be maybe even allowed, maybe say deliveries only, or you know, it'd just be so you could get around the building if you needed to whether to work on it or for the fire department to have access or whatever it may be. But it would just be perhaps a single lane, a 12-foot wide gravel path or something like that. You guys can let me know what you're thinking about for pavement and landscaping and things like that, and I can add that as well to the plans. There's been the discussion about the solar panels on the roof, perhaps. So the orientation of the building, the same thing, you know, we'd want to orient it very well so that it had full exposure. What I told Deb a couple weeks ago was, if it was me, I'd cut down the trees that are out there, the 4 trees, larger trees, and plant some new ones where you really want them to be, and maybe they wouldn't be such tall trees, you know, but you can do anything on site there. But to be able to kind of regrade the site and smooth it all out and make it look exactly what you want to, those trees they're pines, and there's a fir in there maybe, or a spruce or something, but I mean, they're not any sort of trophy trees anyways, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So that would just be something, and you know, they would affect the visibility to the building too. So you might say, well, we'd rather have people seeing the building from Route 4 instead of seeing those trees. And they probably would affect the solar, you know, the solar gain on the roof too, I would think.
Yeah.
But the same thing, you know, that you tell me what you want. It's not necessarily what I want, even though a lot of engineers like to do it their way. You tell me what you would like, and then, you know, I'll do my best to make that happen, essentially. But the leach field will probably go down about where the trees are, you know, in that area on the lower end of the site, so we could gravity flow down to that. So again, I don't have too much here. These will develop. They'll be, when we put the package together, we'll probably include Chris's, we'll do like a title sheet. We'll have Chris's survey sheet in there with his permission. I'd have, an existing condition sheet and then maybe a proposed site plan showing the drives and everything. And then there might be a sheet for the leach field as well, for subsurface.
Do we know we do know what's on the site already. I mean, there's an older septic and an older well, right?
We
Yeah,
don't
you're gonna-
specifically know what they are.
Okay.
You're
They're-
gonna
they're-
get rid of anything.
Yeah.
Those are shallow wells. I would not put a shallow well in here. I'd have a bedrock well, just because there is a lot of surface interaction here between the cars and people parking, and so it's the potential for having better quality water would be from out of the bedrock rather. And then it's a more reliable source as well. You're not dependent, if it's a very dry year, all of a sudden there's only a foot of water in the well because you can only go so deep, and potentially affecting I think there's some other shallow wells here. But a bedrock well, and if we knew what the town had, I could probably get some information on that. That would help to do an estimate on what ours would probably be, because it's going to be very similar, I would guess.
The town office well is relatively new, right?
The one in front of the
The
building
one
there,
right in
that's
front.
been there as long as we've had the building, I believe. It's put there by the former owners.
Okay.
And also, I believe, because I found this out yesterday, we were playing with power, the fire station's already tied into that well.
Yeah.
I wondered
So
that.
I don't know if you can do 3, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure you.
Yeah, I was just curious if we knew how deep it had to go. I mean, it's nice sandy soil, but I've heard there's water.
Right, so a bedrock well, you actually drill down until you get to bedrock, and you put a steel casing in, a 6-inch well this would be, and you actually embed that into the bedrock, and you seal it so that no surface water can get into that. But that well, if we can find some details on how deep it is and how deep it was to bedrock there, that would give you we'd allow to get a good price on what that would be to mimic that. The casing costs X dollars to get down, and then drilling through the rock costs, a separate price as well.
I wondered if the town has that information as far as how deep it is, how many gallons per minute, or is there a test they can run on that?
I would say that the town's gonna have that information. And I don't think it's that hard to find out either. If
Yeah.
you do a little research, you could find out how deep all the wells around here are.
Yeah, because if it has a
There is
sufficient gallons per
documentation
minute, it could
at the
be
state
used.
level even. So our company has hydrogeologists as well. I'm not one, but they would help. I'd ask them to help me out with it if we needed any. But this is pretty straightforward. The system, so it is a system. The source has to be approved by the state and registered because it would be a public use. But they're not, it wouldn't be too much to get that. Then the other thing is going to be what would be the wastewater flow, and that's kind of going to be developed, as you figure out what you're going to use the space for. That's done on a number of different ways. The subsurface rules don't really have libraries per se as one of their standard, typically 150 gallons per day per bedroom. And then they have a list of many other, shopping centers, office spaces. But we can kind of figure that out. It'd probably be mostly based on the square footage of the building. We would want to keep it under, I believe the number was 25 people, 25, not necessarily employees. I have to look it up, but so we
should be able to manage.
Yeah. So I think it doesn't mean you can't have 50 people in the building at once, but it's periodic. It's not 50 people a day. So, but I'll work out as I get additional information. We'll size that, and we'd submit an application to the Subsurface Bureau and get an approval on that. And you can do that. The approvals last, I believe, for 5 years. So it's something $300 application fee. So it wouldn't be very expensive to get an approval for the location of the well and also for the leach field design to get done and have that ready. Hopefully within 5 years, you would build the leach field.
Great.
Right.
Any questions for Mike at this stage? Karen, any questions for Mike?
Thanks, bud.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna sit in too, just so I can, if the.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can kind of, I'll get up to speed pretty quickly on what you're hoping to do, and then I'll have a better idea how to help with that.
Okay. Does it make sense then for Paige to kind of go through the interior spacing, and then we'll talk about how that
Probably
plays
the
out
logical
with
way, yep.
operations and costs?
See if does that help?
There's those solar panels.
Yeah, I didn't put them on.
Okay. Can everyone see?
So essentially, there was some preliminary programming done by others, and a sketch was provided to me based on what we think at this time might be, just kind of the basics that are needed in the library, including storage, library areas, obviously stacks, closed off rooms for conferences or meeting rooms, absolutely a restroom or two. So this is kind of the first pass, so things are malleable, things are flexible, nothing's set in stone at this point, but this is kind of what they call a test fit. So just kind of seeing what we're able to put in, what the space looks like, and then with the limitations we have. So code-wise, we do need 2 exits from the building, and that's due to occupants and the size of the space, and it's for fire reasons and stuff like that. So you'll see there's one over there, and then we have the main entrance. And so the main entrance, we have a vestibule that's kind of, to help keep the cold air out, and, just dust off some shoes and stuff. And right off the entry, we have a restroom, and then attached a janitor and mechanical room. Again, the mechanical, once we figure out what we need, it can either be designated to a storage room, or if it fits in that room, there's also a storage room on the 2nd floor. So in the top right, you'll see there's a conference room. The way those chairs have been set up, they're kind of what we call our, like training tables. So ideally, they might be on wheels, and they can be set up, pushed to the side. There's a little kitchenette in there that might be used, if someone wants to have a birthday party or something like that in that room. And then, because that's closed off, right under the stairs in the middle of the plan, there's another kitchenette that's more able to be utilized by the rest of the library, with a little sitting room next to it. And once you enter the main library, the portion with the stacks, so there's, again, it's very flexible as far as layout. We put some chairs and seats there just so, if people want to grab a book or you want to sit down and do a crossword puzzle, you're able to do whatever you want. At the top right above the stairs, we kind of have like an open librarian checkout area, but attached also a potential director's office that's able to be locked, and, any files or bills and stuff can be locked and put away into that room. And then to the right of there, we have an open kids area, kind of sequestered the noise a little bit away from the open library area, with some more book stacks as well as some seats, and right next to that we have an additional empty room which is just locked storage that can be used for chairs. We can put the tables away. It's a pretty nice size. It's just under, I think, like 12 by 12. So it's a good storage space, and again, it can be used for future use as whatever we need it for.
Can we fit a pellet stove?
I mean, yes.
So Paul will walk us through
Yeah.
kind of energy options and
Yeah.
heating and cooling.
Yeah, but I wouldn't suggest putting a stove in a closed off room.
No.
And then, so this is Library Road down here for reference.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, orientation wise.
Yeah.
So there's the front side, so you'll see those little angled things, those are the barn doors. So ideally, we can't have giant barn doors just open. So we'll need closed off new doors that are accessible. And you'll see that on the entry, and then the other side is just the semblance of existing doors that are closed off, and there'll be essentially a wall. So that's the first floor. If we go up to the 2nd floor, Over to the right where it says open to below, this is basically a 2-story space. So you should be able to look down on whatever's going down in the main library area where the stacks are and the tables and stuff. And so there's a second meeting area on the second floor. It's slightly larger. I set up the tables differently so you can see it's more classroom style, training style if we wanted to have presentations or anything like that. There's an additional lockable storage room up there. Again, it's flexible. If we find we only need one storage room, that can be more seating. And then the rest of the space off to the right is just I put open lounge, so you know you have a variety of tables if you want to sit on the sofa by yourself and read, or if you want to meet up with a couple of friends. We have a variety of seating options for that. And then basically where this conference room is, that's a full height wall. If we want to have a TV on the wall, a projector, anything like that. But on the open lounge side, you'll see in one of the 3D views, it is just a railing. So it's kind of open to below that allows, it's kind of hard for people who don't typically look at plans and stuff to get a grasp of what it looks like. But you can kind of see the railing over here that's open to below, so you kind of have this nice lofty, airy, 2-story space and nothing feels too stuffy or closed in. Again, the windows that I placed were best guesses. Everything at this point is flexible aside from where the barn doors exist currently and then where the columns are, which, or the posts. And right now it's still, I got some measurements, but it's still about best guess. And so, you know, there's gonna be some massaging that happens once we fine tune the plans, but for now, this is what we're looking at. To me, as I was looking at this in 3D, in order to get some light on the second floor, more clear story lights make sense, which for those who don't know what a clear story window is, you have a window just like this, but rather than it being kind of eye level, it's up a little bit higher. So it allows you to put furniture against the wall that's not in front of the window, but it still allows light to come into that space. And since we do have essentially a 2-story space in most of the building, it'd be great to get some natural light in there and, you know, open, airy, fresh. It's also good for your mental health. And so this is just another kind of like a 3D perspective of us standing in that bottom right corner where the tables are looking. You can kind of see the stairs through the stacks and then the railing above that opening. To the right is that kids area, and then nothing's built out where the checkout area is, but that's what's back there. Does anybody have any questions?
What's the total length and square footage?
It's about 68 feet by 38 feet? 32. So we have, I ran the numbers today, so on the first floor it's about 2,100 square feet, and as I modeled the second floor it's I think around 1,200 square feet. So the whole space is give or take 3,500-ish.
Where is the librarian desk?
So if you go to the first floor, if you look central area, so we have the main library and checkout area, which is open to the rest, so they can kind of see what's going on. People are easily able to come up and ask questions, and then right next to it there's a director's office that actually has a closed door for more private phone calls, private meetings, and to be able to lock away any essential documents that the public doesn't need access to.
It seems like when someone steps in, there's no direct sight to that. Like you walk in, you have no idea who you're talking to.
Yeah, that can be changed. It all, like I said, everything's malleable, and this is just the very first pass of the space plan. I did think about that, and so it's something to consider. And any input like that of, you know, what your thoughts are, what you feel. I'd love to write down and get to know what everybody's thinking, because the more people that have input on the flow of things and how things should be. I've personally never designed a library before, so everything's new to me. I've done so many space plans of offices and stuff like that, but never really a library. So input like that is definitely valuable, where you're right, you know, you walk in and they're like, well, who do I talk to? Where am I going? And kind of tucked away behind the stairs at this point.
I would say, I mean, my takeaway, first of all, thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, that's great.
My takeaway is, I mean, the first phase is really just to get the frame up and the envelope around it, and it might be sort of a design build as we, you know, so we know that what we want programmatically can fit in this space.
Yes.
And then once the frame is up, some things might change based on feedback
that,
or,
Right, and
So-
that's another thing. Once the frame is up, then we can have more exact dimensions of where these posts are, what the limitations are based on where the posts are, and how that might change things. Because by code, there's many things for us to consider as far as clearances and to be able to, you know, walk through these spaces without feeling squished or bumping into each other, or to be able to get a wheelchair into these spaces is important.
Yeah.
And so as we fine tune, once the actual shell is up, it will be better to fine tune everything.
Just say something, because he's not gonna see your hand up.
oh, sorry,
Oh.
Steve.
Yeah, no worries. I know this is first pass, but one thing that, like, first thing that I see is like, we've got a lot of meeting space, but like, how many books do we plan on having there?
That
Because,
looks like less than here.
well, I'm thinking
So
it's
there-
probably more than here.
They're all around the perimeter
Yeah.
on the outside.
Okay,
And in the
And
kids'
so
area.
those large ones are 6 feet wide. There's a 6 foot wide, there's a 5 foot wide, and a 4 foot wide, just based on clearances and what it
You
was
mean
able
length.
to fit.
Length, right?
Yes,
And those
yeah,
are-
and the
those are
height can
double-sided.
the height can be as high as we want.
Yeah, so they're all around that wall.
Yeah. What you
And
can
plus
hear-
the
what
The
you-
kids,
the
the
kids
kids,
area.
the kids is in the kids area.
Yeah, so there's more stacks in the kids area. I don't suggest putting additional
Full.
stacks on the second floor. Ideally, you want everything together on one floor so people aren't having to go up and down to look through what they want.
Right, so you don't need an elevator.
Right, so if we don't need 4 tables, say we only need 2 tables, you know, we have 4 more 6 foot stacks, 6 foot wide stacks we can add. So, I don't have a program of how many stacks we need or the amount of books or anything like that, but that would be something to look at. But I think with them being around the perimeter, I feel like we probably have more space here.
Yeah, so like, so this is 600 square feet?
Yes.
Yeah, so we were doing a bunch of the math, so it's like, this way was 30 feet and this way is
No.
24?
Yeah, yes, 30 by 24, yes.
30 by 24. So like half of this space is the 12 feet.
So, including the kids area, this new book stack area would be about 1,350 square feet, so double what we have now.
What about a railing, moving books more? You see that in a lot of libraries, a lot of places storing a lot of books or documents.
Oh, you mean up
Yeah.
higher?
No, it's I don't know how to describe it. It's
Oh, like those collapsible
Oh, the
shelves?
the
that-
rails.
Yeah, rail
Yeah.
to move. I'm saying, well, I think that's probably not our issue. There's not going to be that many books anyways.
Well, we looked at that. And,
Yeah.
and we went to Abbott Library, and they have
it.
those.
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of people like to peruse. We don't feel like that's a really great option. You know what I mean? Because people they want to peruse books, and that's, you know, you gotta crank
Well, the
it
aesthetic
open.
is not
Right.
great.
It's
Not
usually
great.
an option for people that have more books than space.
Right.
Yeah.
I think personally there's adequate space to have all the books we want. There's gonna be more books than this. And then we can find sneaky places to put more stacks. They can go against the stairs, they can go against the kitchenette wall. The layout can be revised to see if we can sneak more in there. That storage room could go away and maybe we only have a second floor storage and there's sitting room in there and more stacks. So, like I said, everything is malleable. Once we figure out how many stacks we actually need, then I can revise the plan to show, you know, at a minimum what's required and then growing space also.
Paige, those were double-sided too, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
each
The spines are
each
on
one-
the outsides of
each one is
Okay.
12 inches deep, so I believe they only need to be 10 inches deep.
You
I
mean on
wasn't able-
each side?
No, this,
Each side.
This,
So like,
this from here to here.
yeah,
The whole width of
The-
the whole?
The shelf.
the whole width. So
shelf
like 10
itself.
inches should hold one book. So
Right.
Since they're back to back, they are double sided.
Right, so there's actually 20 inches.
Yeah, 24
Right.
inches, but yes.
Right.
How big are these? The ones in here right now?
These?
That is not 24.
No, these are 6 by whatever the thickness is. I
No,
think.
yeah, what is the,
We've got a ruler.
Look at that.
It's not even 16.
Okay.
Yeah.
so
So
those
they're
are a little
20,
bit
what?
deeper.
Yeah, if these plan to be relocated to the new space, unless they're staying here, that can be something that I can add and play around with and, take the sizes of them and everything. So,
I think sometimes it's better to be generous with the sizing.
Right.
On the first draft.
right,
so that-
especially
yeah.
since there's code requirements of how far apart these need to be in order for, 2 people to comfortably pass in between. And so with that in mind, there's 4 feet between each one. The minimum is 3'8". But at that point, you're getting a little bit snug if you're passing shoulder to shoulder with someone. So I did give a little bit more space than what is the minimally required, but we'll see.
I think these conference rooms, and especially having 2 options, is great. All the libraries I've toured, they're full all the time. Whether it's the Ladies Benevolence, and we have town hall space too. But this allows for a more contained, especially if you have a TV screen or something to be sharing meetings or.
Yeah, even for birthday parties or just
Well,
booking it,
I
crafting
think
with your
for
friends.
me,
Yeah.
like we've started getting some pushback about having the library open after hours in order to accommodate clubs. And so being able to have a closed off wall where, say, book club could meet or whatever during open hours would be.
Where does this close off?
So that's
The
something to think
conference
about.
rooms
Is
are
Yeah, it is
this
something.
area is.
It is something to think about. We can change the layout of the stairs so there's maybe a
Clear line of view.
what they call a mobile partition to be able to close and lock it, and that way the only areas that would be accessible would be possibly the second floor and then the area on the right, which includes the restrooms. So that's something to think about also.
Yeah, and the other thing about that conference room is people that really need it extra quiet can go in there.
Right.
And because,
Closed off room.
yeah.
Yeah, if we only need one larger meeting room, because we don't have an elevator in this space and there's no plans for an elevator, we do need to offer the same thing on the second floor as we do the first floor. So,
No, the reverse,
for
right?
accessibility reasons.
It's the reverse, right?
Thus, yeah,
We can't
offer
offer,
the
we
same.
can't offer something on the second floor that's not on the first floor.
Correct. Right, so the restrooms couldn't be sequestered to the second floor because someone in a wheelchair is not gonna be able to go up the stairs, or someone who needs ambulatory access might struggle to go up the stairs.
I have a question, so,
Yeah.
but because we have a bathroom on the first floor, we could also put a second one, right, on the second floor?
Yes, we could.
So like that would meet the requirement of 2 bathrooms?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep, and then now you're still offering the same thing
same thing, okay,
on the
great.
floor.
Great. Any other comments before we maybe have Paul talk about how much this is going to cost to operate and if we can get it to net zero?
Are we concerned with things like ADA access, is that a big factor here?
Considering this would be a new build, as far as I'm concerned, it would need to be accessible.
That's what I was thinking.
There are some
Yeah.
grandfathering in of specific things in New Hampshire, but I think because it would be, even though we're essentially relocating the barn, I feel like it would be dubbed a new build, and so we would have accessible parking, accessible entry, accessible thresholds inside, and,
So
you know.
is that all factored in, like in the spacing and passage and all that?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Like the stairs, they look like they take up a huge portion, but in reality, that's the minimum width they can be is 48 inches wide. And then even down to the clearances on the door, you need a certain amount in front of where the handle is to be able to, on the push side, on the pull side, there's slightly different dimensions, and all of that's already been considered when drafting this space plan.
Don't worry, Gary, they'll let you.
My wheelchair?
Yeah, should be wheelchair accessible, as far as I'm concerned.
So I'm wondering even, well, actually, let's go to Paul first, next, and then I have some ideas about how we can
Yep.
maybe collect ideas from the community or thoughts on the plan. But,
Andrew, do you have the
Yeah,
presentation that I sent via email? That's probably the thing. Okay. What I sent last night.
this guy,
Yes.
Rise 2-3.
Yes, yes.
All right.
So, so I did some, what I call conceptual design energy modeling for the building. I did not have the drawings that we just reviewed, because those are fresh off the press, it looks like. What I had was just the rendering that you saw as Andrew scrolled down to here. That's what I had. So I wung it, basically. I knew the footprint. I knew the 68 by 32 or whatever it was. So I knew the size, and that's what I started with. So the modeling that we do back at the office at this stage is what I call conceptual energy modeling. We have a handful of different software programs that we use. I use one in particular for this stage of modeling. And what I do is I plug in all the assumptions about the building, and then poof, the software spits out the results of those assumptions. What I normally would do is I would normally create one model, would be the building built to the energy code. In New Hampshire, we're currently using what's called the International Energy Conservation Code, the 2018 version. I haven't actually flushed all of that out yet in the model, so I don't have the building built to code yet. But what I do have is I have option A and option B. Option A was the first pass and just to see where it lands. And then option B is something more aggressive to see how low can we get the energy use to be, and might it even be possible to power the entire building's energy use over the course of a year with solar. So that was kind of the exercise there. So maybe it makes sense for me to stand next to the screen, maybe, and kind of walk people through it. So I don't know how much detail people want. Like, you know, I'm pretty nerdy, so I can go into as much detail as you want. But
There's shuffle to get around here.
maybe if we, yeah, blow it up a bit. Yep, maybe, I don't know if we want to make it even bigger than that.
Yeah, let me go for a different.
Can't read any of that.
Alright, let's just go for this.
I think that probably works.
Okay.
All right, so as I said, there are three columns. There's a column for the building built to code, which I haven't yet modeled. There's an option A, and then there's an option B. And again, I'll just walk through as much info as you want. Size is 2,277 square feet, one-story barn with a continuous ceiling. I didn't even know the height of the building, so I kind of guessed at the height. I knew it was an existing barn, so I made it pretty tall. The wall constructions that I looked at were a timber frame with a 2x6 wood frame over that with 5.5 inches of fiberglass inside there, with wood sheathing and some kind of siding, and then drywall on the inside. For option B, I beefed that up. I added an inch of some kind of continuous. It looks like I added polyiso foam on the outside of that for the second scheme B to give us a slightly better R value. These R values are effective R values. They take into account the wood that's in the middle of the wall. So they're the effective R value becomes lower because now you've got heat loss through the studs. We can scroll down, and then we have comments. Some of these comments came from Elena and maybe others that said, you know, can you explore this or that. For the roof, I had timber frame with 2x10s over the timber frame with just 9 1/4 inches of fiberglass in there. That doesn't get us a very high R value, probably doesn't even meet the code either. So for the next version, option B, I've added 3 inches of continuous foam over the top of that to get us an R value of 50. 50 is about the minimum that you want to avoid ice dams, and I'm sure we don't want ice dams on this building. So 50 is kind of the minimum that you would want. For the floor, I was assuming that this is a slab on grade building, right? This is going to be sitting on top of a slab. And then I did 1 inch of extruded polystyrene rigid foam insulation underneath the slab in the first version. Wasn't getting me quite where I wanted to go, so then I did 2 inches of foam underneath the second version, and I also added foam to the slab edge, because the slab edge is kind of like the nosebleed. It's where the heat loses out during the winter time. Foundation wall. The foundation wall is also insulated down the length of the height of the wall. For windows, again, all I had was the rendering, so I kind of guessed the number of windows. But I probably have more windows, maybe. So you know, we could tweak that. I think I have 9 windows on the south and the north side, which is the longer side. 6 windows on the east and the west side that are about 4 feet 0 by 6 feet 0. And originally, or I guess in both cases, I just did regular windows, just regular double glazed windows. Window shading, I don't have any window shading on those, but it might be worth exploring maybe to protect the southeast or southwest windows from the solar gain. Glazing, that's the performance of the windows, pretty normal windows. But again, to prevent a cooling load, we probably want a fairly low, what's called solar heat gain. For infiltration, so the code has a number now, and the number is actually for residential buildings. They don't have a number for commercial buildings yet in the energy code. But in a residential building now in New Hampshire, you have to meet a certain tightness, and your building has to be tested for that tightness. And so that's what I used for option A. For option B, I made it much tighter. So that number stands for 1 air change per hour at 50 pascals. That's the pressure that you pressurize the building to test the building's air tightness. In order to achieve that, which we achieve on projects all the time, you really need to do a mid-construction blower door test. Test the building while it's under construction to make sure you're going to hit that target. But in New Hampshire, as we all know, especially on a day like today, about 30% of our heat loss is air leaking to the outside, being replaced by cold air. So that number is actually quite important for the energy use. For HVAC systems, for heating and cooling systems, I've only modeled 1 option so far, but I think it makes sense to explore, you know, like a pellet stove or some other backup heat. So far, I've only done air source heat pump. And air source heat pumps in the past have had kind of a bad reputation. People say they don't work in our climate because it's too cold, but there is now a cold climate heat pump that works very well. Down to 13 below, still produces about half of its output. It was a little bit colder than that in Grafton this morning. But it would be okay. Then I've listed the efficiency of the cold climate heat pumps there, esoteric numbers perhaps. Set points, I made an assumption that we're going to heat the building. In the first case, I heated it to 70 degrees and I set it back at night to 65 degrees. I cooled it to 75 degrees and then let it drift back up to 80 degrees. In the second option, because we've got a better insulated building, more airtight building, I feel like we can lower the setback even deeper. So I've got a 68 degree temperature setting back to 60 degrees. I think that would be fine for this option because you've got a nice robust insulated shell, so the surfaces are warmer than they would be otherwise. Let's see, so for mechanical ventilation, you know, we're all used to having just windows that we can open up, but in the wintertime or in the summertime, you don't necessarily want to do that when it's really cold and really hot. So I have a mechanical ventilation system in there that's going to ventilate the building using what's called an energy recovery ventilator. So it's just a heat exchanger. It extracts the stale air, typically out of like the kitchen, the bathroom, brings fresh air back into where the people are, but it strips the heat out of the outgoing air. So that's the better way to do ventilation these days. For lighting load, so I have to plug in how much lighting load there is in there. I've got a 0.7 watts per square foot in the first case, 0.5 with LED and vacancy sensors or occupancy sensors. In the better version, I don't have any daylight dimming. If you have a lot of glass, you can actually dim the lights up and down based on how much incoming sunlight you have. I don't have that in the model here.
Is that not required by this code?
It's not required by the code unless you have too much glass. If you have too much glass, more than 30%, then you're required by code to do it. Let's see, then I also have to plug in hot water loads. So I made an assumption about hot water in the original case, the case A. I assumed an electric water heater. In the second case, I used a heat pump water heater. So the same technology that can do heating can also do heating of hot water. It's basically a heat pump that sits on top of your water heater, and it takes the heat out of the room and puts it into the tank. That's what a heat pump does. So that's about almost half. It takes almost half the energy use of an electric water heater. So that's a nice savings there. And plug load. That's kind of the big piece of the pie. As we make our buildings more and more energy efficient, the stuff that we plug into the outlets becomes a bigger and bigger piece of the pie. I have to start with some number, and it would be nice to know, how many things are going to get plugged into the building, how many coffee pots and things like that. But I've started off with 1.47 watts. That's the default number from the software. And again, you can change that. Number of people, I have to put in the number of people because the number of people in there means more heating, or means more cooling in the summertime, less heating in the wintertime. I can't assume that people are in there all the time, so I put in a schedule in there for varying occupancy over time. But I've assumed 15 people. In there kind of general. I don't have any solar hot water in there. Let's go down. But I did model a solar electric system on the south. To me, it looks like it's a little bit southwest facing roof. So it looks to me like we could fit about 18.6 kilowatts of solar electric up on the roof. And that would produce about 22,000 kilowatt hours per year. If solar south is possible, if we can orient the building a little bit more to the south, then you can get a little bit more, 24,000 or so. Or maybe we might want to consider something on the ground if we need to. And then I have to plug in information about how much does the fuel cost, how much does the electricity cost. We all know the electricity costs have gone up very dramatically recently. Not so much a concern if you're making it yourself, but if you're buying it, that's a concern. I have to put in an operating schedule, so just to have something that equaled about 28 hours. I've got Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So those are the assumptions that went into the model. Questions about the assumptions? We can
Yeah, so
tweak all of those.
there's a couple of things. So I really didn't have a good sense of plug load at all. Because this library, we walk out, everything gets unplugged, the laptops all get unplugged. I think that that's an important piece that is pretty high in your estimates when we get down below.
Yeah.
So I just left it at.
People are running their air fryers.
Yeah, I think that the estimate that's in there.
Heaters.
Yeah, I mean, I think
this is probably high.
it's probably
on the
high,
high
but
side.
I think that it's probably better to estimate high.
Yeah.
But that
I'd
was
rather start high.
yeah.
Right.
And then the other thing was we didn't know about the demand charge.
Right, so, in our residential energy bills, we don't pay a demand charge because we use a small amount of electricity. But when you're a commercial customer, the utility can charge you a demand, which is charging you for the most amount you used over any 15-minute period over the entire month. So if you only used, if you plugged everything in and your heat was going full blast and everything else was running, and poof, you put yourself over that threshold, whatever that threshold is. Is this the co-op or is this?
No,
Eversource.
Eversource. Oh, okay. Eversource's number is higher probably. We're probably below it, so it's probably not a concern, but it's something that we might want to check just to make sure we're not going to pay demand charge. 'Cause the scenario I've outlined here is an all-electric building, no fossil fuels. So it means we're using more electricity. So, those other questions about the
Yeah,
assumptions?
Paul.
Yep.
So you say operating hours is when you're using more heat and stuff like that or cooling.
Yep.
And so you've got 4 days at
4 days, that's 7 hours. So I was trying to get as close to 27 hours or so that Elena gave me.
So 27, 28 hours. 'cause
Yeah, I have 28, but
Okay.
you had given me 27.
Well, it was rough math.
Yeah. No, but right now we're open 12.
It was now.
Right, I understood that from Elena too. We've done a lot of library projects, and it seems like all the library projects that we've worked on, when the library opens, they all of a sudden expand their hours because it's just so popular. People are just so excited about the new library. So, again, I'm being conservative.
The question we wanted to answer was, how many hours could we be open and it cost $0?
Energy.
Energy
Yep.
use.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So
That-
you're
That
saying,
was the question we were asking.
is that the answer?
Well, so unless there are other questions about the assumptions, we can scroll down. All right, so then the computer program spits out the results, and it gives me lots and lots of information, but I kind of gave you the highlights here, and I can pull more information out of it. Let's see, so the first thing that it gives me is it gives me the total energy use in kBTUs, kilo BTUs, British thermal units per year. Doesn't mean anything to us, but there it is. Then it gives me the energy use intensity, same idea, kilo BTUs per square foot per year. So for people like me, I'm used to looking at numbers like that and saying, is that good or is that bad? To me, this says it's pretty decent for a library. That's probably about where libraries in New Hampshire are. In option B, because we beefed up the insulation and beefed up lighting and et cetera, we did a better job, it's down to 29.1. That feels pretty good to me. That's feeling like a pretty energy efficient building. The total, the yearly electric use in kilowatt hours is 29,744 for option A, 19,000 for option B. You'll recall that we were able, we think, to produce 22,000 from a solar electric system on the south facing roof. Doesn't quite get us to net zero energy, meaning that the building supplies all of its own energy in option A, but in option B it does. In option B, it looks like we could power the entire year's worth of energy with the solar electric system. Keep in mind that in a solar electric system you get more production in the summertime, much less in the wintertime, but this is over the course of a year. So you basically zero out your utility bill. You'll still get a bill from Eversource because you're going to pay a meter charge. But each month or over the course of a year, you'd basically be paying zero for the electricity itself. You'd pay the meter charge, basically. Electric demand, here's where the question about, do we pay a demand charge? These numbers are probably still low enough that we wouldn't. The program calculates, even though it tells us not to use the program for sizing the heating equipment, sizing the cooling equipment, that's not what it's made for. It still gives me that information. So 71,000 BTUs in the first version, 45,000 BTUs for heating in the next building. That's a nice savings. That means I can buy smaller equipment, lowering the capital cost, partially offsetting the cost for the insulation. Cooling load, not surprisingly, is about the same as the heating load. And in this version here, the cooling load is just about the same as the cooling load for the other version. So that doesn't surprise me. We think here in New Hampshire we don't really need air conditioning, but in a commercial building where you've done a really good job insulating it, the heat stays in a little bit better. So it means our cooling energy goes up a little tiny bit. Our heating load goes way down. It compensates for it, more than compensates for it. Total cost per year, if we were paying the electricity at 28 cents a kilowatt hour, which is our current rate, it'd be $8,300. In option A, it'd be $5,400 in option B, but again, we're producing $5,600 worth of electricity from the PV system. And if we're interested in CO2 emissions, the software also calculates CO2 emissions. I usually would normally put what the utility incentives might be, because the utilities will pay us to do energy efficiency. There are other people in the office that are much better at that than I am, so it's not my specialty. But it feels to me like the building probably qualifies for what's called Pathway 1 in the New Hampshire SAVES program, which is the program that all the utilities use, which pays $2 a square foot. It pays you $1 a square foot for building a net zero energy building. And then a year later, if you have actually achieved it, it gives you another $1 a square foot. They also have incentives for the heat pumps themselves and incentives for the lights themselves, so you can go down that path as well. And you could explore, the different paths.
Is that annual or one time?
So the $1 is a one-time thing after you've built it, and then the other $1 a square foot is a year after you've built it and
If
proven
you're
it.
meeting.
Yep, so it's a one-time thing. And then the program also produces lots of different charts, and I kind of gave us a couple of them here. So this is showing annual energy use. Option A is in red, option B is in green, and here we're looking at heating, cooling, lighting, other, which includes the plug load. In this case, it includes plug load, fans, hot water.
Yeah, so I feel like that one's an important one that we need to look at.
That
a
is an
little
important one,
closer.
because you'll notice that
Yeah,
that's
it's
kind of
pretty
the
big.
biggest piece of the pie.
Yeah.
So here's the total. So here's option A, here's option B, and this is in energy use per square foot. So nice savings with option B, and then there's one more chart, I think. This is broken down a little bit more. This is the same thing, option A in red, option B in green. This is interior lights, exterior lights. I've got a little bit of energy for exterior lights. Let's see that next.
Hot water.
Hot water, thank you. Yep. Hot water, not very much hot water. Other, in this case, this is just the plug load. This is the 1.47 watts per square foot. And then what I did is I have to plug in a schedule, even though I know that we're open from 10 to 5, theoretically. I have to say from midnight to 1 a.m. it's this, and then from 1 a.m. to this. So I kind of put in a percentage, so I kind of guessed those, I lowered those down. But still, that's a pretty big piece of the pie. Heating energy is the biggest piece of the pie in option A, but not so with option B. Cooling energy, you can see that cooling energy and heating energy almost match there. And then the fan is the fan to run the ventilation system. I think that's it. Then here's the PV analysis. So I use a program called PV Watts, which is a program with the National Renewable Energy Lab. And I plug in the size of the system based on the roof area, the orientation, the tilt, which I had to guess at. And then it gives us the production per year. The thing to know about energy modeling is it's not an exact science. It's partially science, it's partially art. Your mileage may vary. Your mileage will vary. I always sort of jokingly tell our people that we work with that your mileage may vary as much as 100%. But hopefully, as you refine the building, you can keep kind of going back and refining the design or refining what you put into the inputs into the program and make it even more accurate each time. But we find that it's pretty close usually.
So I have a question. So
Yeah.
if we go with option B, which is the beefier of the
More expensive.
more expensive. So
Yep.
do we have is there like a scale for that? Like it's going to be, you can assume 20% more expensive to
Yep, good question.
construct?
So I always tell folks that that we do this part, but we don't do the cost estimating part. Usually we leave that up to the builder, to give us the extra cost. I would guess that it's probably in the 10% range or so. You've spent more money on better insulation, but you've also shrunk down the loads. So you've got a little bit less heating, a little bit less cooling size for equipment. That saves a little bit, but 10% might be a reasonable guess. Other questions?
Just another comment that with this kind of scientific application of energy efficiency to the building, it maybe makes it less of a volunteer-led thing. Like if we were to do,
Well, I
volunteer
think
to
some
do
of the
insulation.
the insulation I think I would say is actually an example of one of the ones that could be done. But we couldn't do like installing heat pumps. We couldn't do installing air conditioning.
We weren't going to be doing that.
Yeah,
with any
no,
particular
but you know what I
furnace,
mean. Like, I think that there's ways that people can be taught to install
Yeah, I
a
think
panel
so.
of
I think
insulation.
so. The original scheme A was just 2x6 walls with fiberglass insulation, so anybody could pretty much do that. The next scheme is the same thing, but we've added foam insulation to the outside. That's still pretty user-friendly.
Yeah,
Could conceivably be done.
in the barn raising style.
Yeah, maybe you hire a builder, a competent builder to kind of oversee.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
they kind of,
Well, that mid construction, test.
Yeah, yeah, that's highly
is
recommended.
nice. I mean that.
Yep, that's highly recommended,
Tells you
because that's a
if you're
big
doing a
piece of the energy use.
Right.
Other question, comment? So as I said, this was based on the concept sketch that you had given me, Andrew, so it's not based on what you have paid,
Mine
so.
shouldn't be too far off.
It won't be too far off, it won't be too far off, but it might be worth, taking this
Well,
design
yeah.
and starting, it'd be a new it'd be a new model, it'd be
Right,
starting over.
as far as
with
the glazing goes, and stuff like that.
And all the space heaters. Yeah.
Ideally, no space heaters.
Yeah, ideally no space heaters, right.
Gets you in trouble.
Right.
Well then, another thought. I mean, so this is just with the rooftop solar. If
Yeah,
it turns out that we need a
Yep.
tracker, or we need, even to pay for some electricity, that's an option,
Not, yeah,
right?
that's
That's
not out of the question.
Yeah, so this is sort of a trade-off exercise, right? So you could say that in option A, my solar electric system isn't big enough, so maybe I put a tracker in the field and I produce more electricity. So it's kind of a trade-off. Solar electricity has plummeted in price over the last decade. So some people are saying we don't need to go as aggressive with energy efficiency because the renewable energy piece now is cheap, or I shouldn't say cheap, but cheaper than it used to be for sure.
Right.
A lot cheaper than it used to be for sure. So, you can kind of do the,
Yeah.
normally if we were working on a project, we'd work with a builder, and the builder would price out option A, option B, option C, and and then the owner can make the decision.
Is there I mean, this might be a tougher question for you, but is there a scalable option where, so this solar array gets us just the library. If we wanted to say, get extra solar to accommodate for the town hall or town office usage, or for anything within Eversource territory, we couldn't get it just on the roof, obviously.
No.
We'd be looking at,
Well, I'm not even
Right.
sure we could reasonably get it in the field, in our field.
yeah.
It would have to go.
Yeah, it looks to me, based on the current size, that you're gonna get just enough just to do your building.
I can just tell you that I have solar power, and my electric bill for 8 months out of the year is just the fee that the co-op charges us. That's it.
It works.
It does work great.
Any questions for Paul?
Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah,
that's
thanks.
really
That was great.
great information.
Great information from all three of you.
Geothermal didn't get any cheaper, did it?
Nah.
Geothermal is a very good option. It's the most efficient system out there. So in terms of energy efficiency, it's the most efficient of all the choices, because what you're doing is you're using the earth as a heat source and a heat sink, and it's 55 degrees plus or minus. It's more expensive to install because it's essentially the same technology as what I've identified here, except now you're adding the drilled wells for the heat sink. And I could estimate how many wells you need and how deep they need to be based on the load here. And then we could talk to a driller, a company that does geothermal systems, and get a price.
But in your experience, is solar usually cheaper than geothermal? No?
I guess I'm not sure. My guess is it would probably make more sense to do the solar, because the solar has come down so much in price, than the geothermal. That would be my guess, but
Okay.
not scientifically determined. It's a gut.
Professional estimate.
Yeah, gut.
Okay. Cindy.
Just as a broad overview, so this was great the way you laid it out, starting with the foundational, or the site work, and then going to the interior, and then the solar part. I'm wondering why your plan, or your phase one doesn't follow that same pattern. You're gonna put down a slab and a building envelope without having done the site work, without having septic well, without having the land.
So that is included in the first phase.
Taking down trees.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
Okay, because that's not the way the article reads.
I mean, the article doesn't go into the level of detail to include tree cutting.
Because the way it's written, it sounds like you're gonna go pour a slab and put up a barn, and nothing else on that land is gonna be done until phase two.
Okay, so we should. I mean, that's good. I mean, so we can clarify that through our communications, or we could
Yeah,
include
deliberative
site
session.
work with deliberative
Deliberative
session
session.
amendment. Yep.
So in that $210,000 price tag, this is including the work he was talking about with the well and the septic and clearing the land?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. I can pull up. Wow.
So here's a different question. What is not included in phase one?
Interiors.
Just interior?
Interiors.
Septic, that's,
Septic
I
is
can't
included.
remember where we put, if it was in phase one or phase two.
is there just 2 phases?
But we need the plan in order to,
Right.
we can't do
Like ideally, when you're pouring the slab,
You
you'd
know
like
where
to
the
know where the
septic
plumbing is
it's
going.
gonna be, yeah.
That's what confused me.
Yeah, you have to know where the plumbing is.
Oh,
So like, you can still have a plan for the interiors that's more or less set in stone, but it may not be happening for a little
Right.
bit, and there still might be some tweaking.
Right.
But it'll just avoid you having to trench for your plumbing,
Right.
which is extremely expensive and not needed if we're pouring a new slab.
Are you doing radiant floor heat, or do you know? That would be something you need to know before you
So
put the
the,
slab, you
so
know.
the, Steve Bedard is the person that, did the Gilmanton barn, which we've kind of modeled our plan on. And he recommended radiant floor. They did it barn raising style. He said, it's not hard to do. You can just have a few guys out there and do it in a day. So,
Radiant was not included in your.
I did not include radiant because, so with a radiant slab, you need a boiler, which is gonna be fossil fuel based, and I was trying to power the building with its own solar power to make the cost 0.
right.
That was my
I think
goal.
that's, yeah, I think that's a good goal.
But certainly, we could explore that option. I could put in a boiler and instead run propane or oil or whatever.
I mean, I think it's a better argument to say that that building costs less to operate than this one does for 12 hours a
It's
week.
kind of compelling.
It's a compelling argument, and I think it's a good goal.
I'm looking at the breakdown of phase one. Yeah, it includes septic and well, and site work. Okay. So the next, well, first of all, I'll just say thank you again. I know this is a lot of volunteer time on your behalf, so we're great. Well, I'm speaking on behalf of Karen and I, but I'm greatly appreciative of that. And it's also just, and it's also just nice to know that in our small town we have all this
Such
expertise.
Yeah,
This
right.
is amazing.
That's really
Yes.
nice.
Yeah.
Our next, so it sounds like we all have some things that we'll continue
Yeah.
working on.
So,
There's a communications part that.
yeah, so how do we get this out to people so that they can give us questions? I know I have somebody working on our website, so I'm happy to put it up as a draft, but then should it go to the trustees?
Well, I think we should have drawings available in the library
Okay.
for people to look at,
Okay.
and we can do maybe a post-it wall note or a post-it note wall where people can write comments, or we can have a binder where people can
Okay.
collectively
Put
comment.
questions, and then they'll be in
Yeah.
next meeting.
Yeah.
Plus with Paul here videoing and it being online, a lot of people will be able to see a
Yeah,
lot
I'm just
of
wondering
the
if there
things.
shouldn't be some, like, consolidated this email address, so that
Oh,
it's all going to one place, so it's easier to address.
I mean, we could.
Does the trustees have a general email address?
Yes.
If
I think they're
should-
forwarded. I think they're forwarded to the director.
Okay.
We can check on that.
I just think it would be nice for you guys to just have one place. You can,
Well, the town can create, how many emails do we get for the
I
town?
think we're fairly unlimited
Okay,
as of now.
okay.
So for me to work through one person would be best,
Yes.
so that I don't know who I should be talking to or not talking to. You know, one thing I'd say is that the orientation of the building and the roof angle, of course, is pretty important as far as I know.
Yeah.
I could say that we've just recently done a well for a community, and they had federal money, and they had $100,000 for solar panels to go up to offset their electric costs there, and it's an allowed use within a well radius, because solar panels are not allowed use. I do, you know, there's some pretty good land in this, it's good orientation out there to, you know, even if they're not on this site, you know, maybe out behind, and, you know, maybe that's a good option too, a ground mount system instead of a roof system, you know, just to keep the roof a little simpler. And then the orientation of the building isn't as important if you don't have the panels on the roof. So then maybe you can put it, you know, facing, you know, like this orientation here, north is this way. So that orientation wasn't even close to north-south for the roof line. And so for me, that's the same thing, you know, well, I can put the building in anywhere you want, you know, it's just a rectangle, and how close do we want to get? And you want to plan the roof line, you know, the roof pitch to be as advantageous as possible.
Isn't
You know,
the
stuff
roof
like
pitch
that.
already determined by the timber frame?
The pitch is determined, but
Yeah, that's what I
the
thought.
orientation of the building is not,
Right.
so.
Right, so is
I'd
that,
say like define
rendering,
it as solar south.
yeah, is that rendering fairly accurate, we think?
This was
That's what I
this was a much older one, moving this building to the site, to that site.
Yeah.
So we're starting from scratch there. But my point was that I'll draw something
Yeah, as
kinda
close
similar
to solar
that.
south as feasible, makes sense.
Yeah, and I
Right.
think, Mike, if I'm not mistaken, solar south would be, the building would have to be angled something like this.
It's
Yes.
somewhere in that range, yeah.
Yeah, there's a north arrow on that plan.
Yeah.
So the main entrance is on the north side of the building.
Yep.
So that's, I mean, even that is a consideration, you know, how do we like that or not? So it's all, I mean, it all works together, or, you know, there's competing interests a lot of times anyways with it. But for me to, well,
But the other thing
where do I draw that in?
But the other thing I would say is if it makes more sense to orient the building parallel to the road, and that's like 30 degrees off of solar south, that's probably fine. You know, within 30 degrees of solar south, it lowers the production a little bit, but maybe we add an extra inch of foam to compensate, you know, an extra inch of insulation.
I mean, there's enough room there to play around with. I think, yeah, I think we're fine. Room.
Or like you say, you can add additional ground mount panels in the future if that,
Right.
like, why not, if you wanted to.
Yeah, or work with the town.
I mean,
to have
ideally, why wouldn't,
additional-
you know, to me, it's like, well, why wouldn't you have, like, this is a community here, why wouldn't we all want to reduce the electric costs for all of the buildings here,
Right.
you know, I mean, in a sense, that's what I think about doing, produce a little, you know, figure out, well, what do we need for all the buildings, and then net metering for all of them if we can, you know.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There are many towns in New Hampshire right now that are doing community systems that are for their municipal buildings.
Sure. Sure.
Do they make the on-ground solar panels where the angle adjusts seasonally?
They do.
And do they cost a whole lot more than ones that don't adjust?
Yeah, so the ones that adjust automatically are probably like 30% more cost with a tracker that tracks the sun. But
And they're mechanical, so, you know,
30% more
mechanical
cost,
things
how
do
much more
break.
energy? What
Yeah,
percentage
right.
of energy does it increase?
Gary.
Do we have a breakdown of exactly what's in phase one and phase two, and where in that phase these questions need to be decided? Where, it sounds like. we have to
What was the
do
second
something.
part of your question?
We have to know, do we have a breakdown right now of what's in phase one, what's in phase two, and where these questions that are coming up need to be decided before we actually start phase one, and we can go on to phase two? And the second part of that is, do we have a cost breakdown of exactly what's in phase one?
We do. We can get. I mean, that'll be part of
Two
the.
kind of go together. I mean, it's-
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that'll be on the website, and we'll make sure that there's that math available for people.
I don't understand the phasing, the question.
So what are the this is my what are all the items in phase one? Like, what does phase one include, and what are all of those costs
Sure.
versus what's being set aside for phase two, and what are those estimated
But I
costs?
heard something about like when a decision has to be made.
Oh, and
If you're
how-
gonna move the interior plan
As far as these
two,
questions are
that needs to be
deterred,
included in phase
do you wanna
one.
tilt it this way, do you wanna tilt it that way, do you wanna have this on the roof, that on the roof? I would think we'd wanna know that before we get phase one done. And
Oh,
say,
of course, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, sorry.
Yeah, so I think
actions.
It
as
took
we
me a
work-
second.
Yeah, so as we work with Mike and Paul on this, you know, the orientation of the building doesn't change the cost, right? The pad is still the same size. The site work, since it's a flat lot, is still relatively the same cost. So my understanding is
We've
that
got a
that
lot
would
of
be,
flexibility.
yeah, once construction season starts, that will be finalized.
Is there a cost for phase two?
We have estimates, I mean, you know, rough estimates from those we've talked to about finishing out and talking to architects too. Projections in this market are really tough, but we know it's going to be, you know, what do we say, around 400? I'm looking at the notes.
Well, we did it.
400 square
400.
foot?
No, 400,000 for the interior.
That's
But we also did a cost escalator because the longer it takes to start, the more it's gonna cost. And so it's just kind of like there's really not much, we
Yeah.
can give you a ballpark, but it's gonna go up, you know, the longer it takes.
For instance, 2 years ago when we looked at the barn proposal, it was estimated at about 420,000, 410,000, and so we know now it's, you know, it's up to 600 something thousand at this point total.
Does that include furniture and other interior
I don't know if it
stuff?
We did put
Yeah, we did,
furnishings
yeah.
in here. Yep.
Do you intend to use what's in here?
I'd like to use as much as we can. Yeah, I mean, furnishings in my mind is something that we can, you know, once it's already open, and you know, we can add furniture, you know, year 3 or something.
Thrifting, resourcing.
Yeah. I personally don't like when you go to new libraries, it seems very sterile, right? And
Yeah.
I like the kind of.
I'm not a fan of Kilton Library at all.
Yeah.
Well, even the Abbott Library, same thing, it was just very hospital, it felt
Yeah.
like a hospital.
Whereas like everyone's ordering from the same catalog.
Yes,
Schools,
exactly,
hospitals,
right.
libraries,
Yep,
yeah.
yep.
Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay, sorry.
So do you want me to kind of make a best guess at it and come up with, you know, here's a layout, here's, you know, even this number of spaces there, what this one had, two, four,
This is the old
maybe
one.
12 spaces. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm thinking a little more, but of course, you could park over maybe at the fire station, or, I mean, there's,
I mean, I
so on here, yeah, well, we're gonna have a walkway going over to there in case there's overflow parking there, but,
Yep.
I mean, I can take a shot at, building size, you know, some buffer area around the building, access. I mean, the parking, it's nice, you know, it's nice to use that space in front of the building on the south side, to me, is, you know, that's, especially in the winter, a little preferable if you had anything on the outside of the building. It's nice to be out in the sun instead of in the dark side of the moon, kind of.
Yeah, but that would be on Route 4 side, wouldn't it, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, how much traffic is there on Route 4 anyways, really, or?
I'll
And I
tell
know
you
that
what,
you
we had a
guys-
program out there this summer. You cannot hear, we couldn't barely hear the guy
Oh,
because the
yeah.
traffic is so busy.
You know, and I know there's there's the ideas of garden, you know, a community garden maybe, or I don't know what
Yep.
what are the other thoughts here. I mean, but it's a nice site to be able to do, you know, a bunch of different
Oh,
things
yeah,
on it,
absolutely,
for sure.
absolutely.
Which you can always do in the future though too. But it's nice to kind of get it laid out.
Yeah.
You
I
know, the
think
bulk
that-
earthwork would all be done, you know, and it'd be kind of the shape that you want it to be long term.
Absolutely.
I feel like people have an easier time criticizing a plan that's in front of them. So they can say, well, I don't like that because, than it is for people to say, okay, well, I wanna lay it out like this. Do you agree? I mean,
Yeah, it's easier for people to visualize.
like, yeah,
You
like
know,
the
you can talk
stairs,
about
for
adding
example.
12 parking spaces, 18 parking spaces, and how they're laid out, and where the pathways to the library go, the entrances. conceptually you can talk about it as much as you want, but it's much easier for someone to see something, even if it's just like this interiors, which is just a test fit, and all of it can be mushed around however we need it to. It's easier to get input that way, where people can see something and say, well, why is it this way? Why, are we able to move this, or revise this to be more accommodating for this reason?
I know that someone had suggested parking like right on the roadway, right off the roadway, just kind of pull in and pull out. But I would kind of frown against that. Maybe you could get the town to approve something like that, but it's not preferable, because there's, the first thing that would happen is someone would back out, somebody'd run into them, and then they'd say, Horizons Engineering, what did you do there? And like, Duffy, why did you, and so, you want to have it so that, it's more traditional, and most towns wouldn't allow anything like that.
We're not most towns.
I know, yeah. I mean, we could do it whatever we want here, but it's still not, it's not preferable to do. Get onto the property, entrance, exit, visibility, that's what you kind of want.
Well, I see the parking as an option to consult with the town and even the historical society to see, okay, we know that people park down Library Road during town meetings, so is there a way to make that situation cleaner or safer?
Or you just even plan, you say, in phase 1 parking, and then if we need more parking in 5 years, well, this is where we're going to put it. You already know where that would go.
Yeah.
Down
Right over the well in the septic system.
One last question.
I mean, the well probably could go up pretty close to the building. It's not a bad idea to put it relatively close. But I guess what I'll do is I'll do at least one kind of layout, and it's the same thing. How do I distribute that to one person, and you send it out to everybody else to take a look at? And
I know you've been.
No, I
traditionally
just assume
communicating
you
with that, but
take
I'm
it
happy
over
to be
because
the-
you're the trustee,
Yeah,
you're
I'm happy
the
to be the point
trustee
person
and
for
stuff,
that.
so I'd rather have you, I don't think it's wise to go through one person,
Yeah.
one person.
it's always good to have the info flow through one, I find.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you start getting emails from 5, 6,
Right,
10
right.
people, like, well, who's in charge here anyways?
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's-
this was
that's
just
my
our,
question.
get
Are
people
there
in
any
here.
Yep.
plans? Who is the quote-unquote project manager, or are there any plans to get one for someone who's gonna coordinate all those details and be sure people are talking to the right people, and that the costs and the schedule and the requirements all come together?
Yeah.
How are we gonna do that?
Or we're blaming, basically.
What's that?
Or we're blaming.
Who we blame? Yeah.
That's usually me. In my world, I always say, if somebody has to be to blame me. I'll take responsibility for it, and now let's move on. Because, it doesn't really matter sometimes, you do the best you can, but there's always, even in a job like this, there'll be a step back or two. You hope that they're very small steps back, though, and most of the steps are good forward steps. But there's always something that you didn't know about, or it came up, or it's just the nature of humanity.
Yeah.
Well, to Gary, your point, Aaron Allen, our timber framer, who was paid for taking down the barn and will be reassembling the barn. I think for first phase, it's been assumed that he would project manage too, but we'll have that conversation with him.
Who has the last say? Is it the library director? Is
the
it
trustees.
The trustees are the
Yeah.
final on everything.
Actually, the voters.
Well,
Fair
that's true.
enough.
As the
Yeah.
project is going.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but
trustees
we would be
ultimately.
in communication with the project manager.
Yeah.
I can export a CAD file, so at least we have something that you could probably use, and I assume you use CAD.
I don't. I still use a pencil, colored pencils,
That's almost
but that's
unbelievable.
I
Is
have
it useful to you?
I have a lot of people that we do we do everything in CAD. Yeah. Of
Okay,
course.
so if I get you a CAD file, someone can help you.
Sure, absolutely. I need a lot of help, and luckily I have a lot of help.
All right.
I have white hair as well, so I don't use CAD either.
That's usually that everyone's using CAD and not the 3D software. So,
Right, so PDFs for me. But
well, I'm the opposite, and I cannot hand sketch to save my life. So,
I think what I would like to do is kind of combine all this information into shareable content that we can put a link to on the town website. If Fogel, if you're making a website, to have it there, to have a binder here with that information, and then again just start, sharing the frequently asked questions, collecting comments, and yeah.
Does anybody have an idea of how many parking spots you'd
I
want to
think
have
when they-
on site, or?
Originally, we had said like 10 to 12, but that was however many years ago.
That was UK. I mean,
That
that
was
was
I mean,
when
UK
that was-
estimated.
this
that was
sketch
back
is
in
helpful
UK.
for me because there's a lot of information on that for me.
I would think we'd stay
want that
around
in the
that.
site plan,
I mean, because,
Are you able to figure it out by, there's a code formula?
Well, it would depend, again, it's just like the septic, the subsurface as well, what's the use in the building? And it's the same sort of thing where there's standards you can go by, but you can also you can make an argument for them being a little different or otherwise.
Right.
A lot of times you back into it, it's like, well, how much room do we have to put in the spaces, and we can fit 20, okay, we're gonna put 10 in initially, like I said, and then maybe
Right.
show dash lines
Right.
of where
Yeah.
we
Right.
could expand to in the future.
that's really a really good idea. I mean, at this point, to have 10 to 12 parking spaces, whatever, I mean, the overflow during the good weather, there's plenty of parking all around,
Do we need to know that?
Gary?
Do we need to actually know some of these things, like the number of parking spaces, how many people are gonna be inside the library at a certain time, the size of the septic system has to be determined by that, the size of the water in the well, all these details. Are they in a plan or a document or something that we have a handle on, that we actually point to and say, that's what we're actually gonna build?
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off that if you don't mind, because I was asking the exact same question, because it's like, it seems like we got this number that's out there, but yet we don't even know which way the building's gonna face, how many parking spots we have, what kind of heating system we may or may not use, whether it's a heat pump or it's gonna be done solar, like, I'm kind of curious how you can put anything on the website and say it's gonna cost this, when we don't even know what that is yet.
Exactly.
So
And I think that's what Gary's trying to get
Yeah.
at.
So the heating is phase two. I mean, like we talked about, we can do the things that orient the building to position it best, but the actual mechanical, all that stuff is in future phases.
But you're gonna have, if you're gonna do something different like radiant heat, and maybe you're not gonna do it, you've already decided against it, but you've gotta know that ahead of time. You're gonna have to know what you're gonna have for, insulation and option A versus option B versus, your high def, world of energy savings. And that's where I think
Right, and
that's
the
what Gary's trying to
bathrooms,
get at, and I know
you
I
need to
am,
know
it's like,
where any of the sub-slab work would be.
yeah, it's almost like you need a plan before you can go forward with pricing. I mean, I think you said it yourself, usually we work with a builder at this point, but it's really like, hey, we're just gonna throw down this thing in this frame, we're gonna hope for the best that we fit underneath $210,000. And that's what it feels like sitting back here just watching. And I know I haven't been in the middle of it for a while, but I think that's what a lot of the town's gonna think, is like, what is the plan? And I don't think there is a solid one yet.
Well, pricing is done at all different phases of a project. I mean, conceptual pricing is done, and the more you refine your design and what you're gonna put in it, then the pricing is refined as well. But it's not unusual. People say, well, how much does it cost to put water main in? And I say it costs $200 a foot if you're in a road. So I mean, you don't even know anything about it, but so conceptually all the time, even we use the number sometimes $100,000 per acre for site development. Now, but of course it depends on a lot of things. So there's a range of what you could do with
At
that.
least you start with something and you refine it.
Yeah, you're always refining it until you have the final plans, essentially. Yeah.
Where's that
I
plan?
don't
to start
understand
with?
how is this not that?
What?
We are working towards that plan here.
Agreed. I agree with you 100%. What I'm asking is,
Why
it's
don't we
like
have it
you're
already done?
already talking about putting up all the pricing up on the website. I believe that's what you said was gonna happen, right? We're gonna put phase one pricing on the website. If you don't know what the plan is, how do you put a price on a website if you don't even know what the design is yet? That's my biggest part to this, is like the money detail section of this. It's like, there's a concept, yes, and there's a possible bucket of money to throw at it, but do those two equal out? And I don't think we know that yet with what we hear today. Trust me, this whole net zero thing, awesome. It's a great idea. You know, I think it's a smart move because, let's face it, electricity's not getting cheaper as we go. But the fact is if we don't know how that's going to be built, we can't price for it. That's my.
I mean, I can only say that, I mean, we've been in conversations with all of these professionals and experts for months now. So, I mean, the numbers that we've thrown out for that first phase is not just a number up in the air. I mean, it's based on some of this information.
When and where did
Alright.
those conversations
Wait a minute.
take place?
Wait a minute. Can I just say something? I want to answer Steve's question a little bit because I've been involved in the process. Is, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're deciding is minor tweaks, like where the building goes. As long as it's facing the south, it doesn't. You know, that part really don't matter as far as cost goes. You know, where the building goes or what the interior design is, where it's not going to be done yet. It just gives us a basis for the outside. I mean, so a lot of this stuff is minor tweaking.
That doesn't cost.
Having a well and a septic doesn't matter where the well and septic is, as long as you can pay for the well and septic. I mean,
How do you know how big it should be?
well, I think
Well, that's an order of
so.
magnitude too, and it's not gonna be, I mean, this is not gonna be any sort of big septic system. And even the well, you know, I mean, you're not gonna need much capacity from the well. 2-3 gallons a minute's gonna be adequate.